Hi everyone, and welcome to Chapter 1 of your textbook Public Relations Cases. And we will be talking today about public relations in action. So we're going to start by defining public relations. And in its simplest form, it can be defined as a function which creates and maintains relationships with publics. And this is something we hear very often in talking about public relations, is that we want to create and maintain mutually beneficial relationships, which is not something that we see necessarily reflected in this definition here, is the idea that they're mutually beneficial. And what that means is that the relationship between a public and its organization should be reciprocal. The public should get something from the organization, and the organization should get something from the public. And this can vary based on what the organization is. If it's a nonprofit organization, it might be something like donations or volunteer time. If it's a conglomerate, a huge corporation like, say, Walmart, it's probably consumer dollars, right? They want you to come into their store and buy things. But what does a public get from that organization in exchange? For the nonprofit, it might be just the reward of doing something good, to be contributing to a charity. For Walmart, might be something like getting a really good deal on body wash. It just varies on what that organization is, and we will take a look throughout the course of this class at a variety of different types of organizations as well as different industries that PR works in. And you'll see how that relationship changes and what each part of those relationships get in return for participating with one another. So you can see here that it says relationships are collaborative, and that means that it's not something that is static or unchanged, but we continue to work on them between an organization and a public. That's why PR practitioners exist, and it's something that an organization and the public creates together. They work together to establish what that relationship looks like. They are interactive, so we want to always make sure that our public is engaged with our organization. That's a big part of what we do in terms of creating our tactics for PR, is making sure that our publics actually interact with our organization, because this continues to keep them engaged with our organization, and it continues to help maintain that relationship. And then, of course, they're participatory. They need to be something where we both have an active role in that relationship, both from the organizational side and from the public side as well. So how does public relations function in this whole definition of PR, working for an organization? Well, the biggest thing we do is we help solve problems, and there's a variety of different types of problems you can work on as a PR practitioner. You might be in charge of anticipating, analyzing, and interpreting public opinion. This talks a lot about monitoring, where we're doing that environmental scanning and listening to what publics are saying about our organization. That's where anticipation becomes really important, because we want to make sure that we are listening to conversations happening about our organization in order to be preventative, to insert ourselves into conversations early enough that it's not something that becomes a problem. And then we also take it and analyze and interpret it, and then hopefully create some sort of plan that helps address that public opinion, concerns, questions that our public might have. We also can work to help provide counseling management on courses of action and communication. Oftentimes this is sort of the second step of what we do. First, we do a ton of research. That's part of the analyzing and anticipating. And then we create a course of action. So what are we actually going to do about all this information we found out? We do a lot of researching, conducting, and evaluating programs of action. And when we get to the rope method, you'll see how this sort of all comes together. We do some planning and implementing efforts to influence public policy. This is especially important when we talk about the public affairs model, and the idea that we as PR practitioners can potentially influence legislation or what's happening in the government around us, which is really exciting. And then last, we manage the resources around setting objectives, planning, budgeting, recruiting, and training staff. So you can see here there's a lot of different hats that a PR practitioner wears, a lot of different functions that PR can serve in an organization, and truly it's going to be specific to the industry and the organization you work for. It really is going to vary from job to job, and that's sort of the most exciting thing about our field, is that it's different no matter where you work. So let's talk a bit about the PR process, and this is the process that your textbook predominantly focuses on, and what we'll focus on in this class. But there's a lot of different types of processes out there in reference to public relations. We're going to talk about the rope method. In Intro to PR, you probably also heard about the RACE method, which is very similar, another acronym. And then in strategic campaigns, we take it a little bit further and we actually talk about 4 phases and 9 different steps. But I think this is a great starting off point in determining the basics of what goes into a PR plan and into the PR process, is to take a look at this ROPE method. So you can see it's an acronym. It stands for research, objectives, programming, and evaluation. And then the coming slides will break down what each of those means a little bit more. So research is a big part of PR that I don't think a lot of students come into PR knowing about or really understanding how important research is. But the biggest focus in creating credibility for our field is making sure that we incorporate research into what we do. So we really stress the importance of using communication research. That's why you take it in your communication core classes. But just how important it is to understand the organization you're working for, to understand the problem or opportunity that's presented itself, what's going on, what's happening in your organization that actually has warranted the need for a public relations plan. We need to fully understand what that problem is, what it arose from, what its history is. Has something been done before to try and solve it? We need to know all of that information. And then, of course, we need to know about our audience or public. So oftentimes organizations conduct significant research to find out more information about who their audience is. And there's so many resources available to organizations now with the use of social media and the internet that we really can get very detailed in understanding who our public is. And that's what we truly like to see when we read through these cases is, did these organizations have a really well-defined public? That's something I'm really challenging you to ask as you read through some of these cases. From there, we move to the O in the ROPE method, which is objectives, and setting goals or objectives for a program that solves the problem or capitalizes on the opportunity is our true intention with an objective. We're saying, we did all this research, we found what our problem was, what was at the root of the problem, and now we're going to formalize some statements that say, here's what we want this program to do. When we conclude this PR campaign, here's what we want those outcomes to be. So first we ask ourselves, is the purpose to inform? Do we find that people are just not very informed about our organization? Do they not have a correct opinion about us? Is the information they're receiving inaccurate? So what is our intention? Do we need to just have them be more knowledgeable about what our organization does? Or are we trying to change behavior or attitudes? So maybe I want them to have different purchasing behaviors. I want them to purchase a different product or switch their product over. Maybe I want to change the way they feel about our organization. Maybe they view our organization in a negative way and really don't understand what we do, and that's something that we need to really repair through information and attitude shift. So we have to ask ourselves, after we know those things, are we informing? Are we changing behavior? Are we changing attitude? How does this program operate? How do we actually see this becoming a plan and formalizing into something that is real and actionable? And that's when we shift into our programming portion. This is sort of the fun part of PR planning. Research and objective creation are necessary, but they take a lot of time, and oftentimes our first instinct is to rush into this programming portion because it's the fun part. It's the planning and execution of the PR campaign, where we talk about things like, what theme are we going to use for our campaign? Are we going to have a slogan? What does our messaging look like? Maybe we're going to create some key messages about what we know they need to know about our organization. We start to come up with a lot of our tactics here. So if we're sending news releases, or we're going to hold a press conference, or maybe we're creating some really beautiful flyers that are going to go up around local businesses. Those are all part of the programming portion. Those are what falls under the methods. How are we going to actually take what we know they need to know, our messages, and deliver those messages? What are those communication channels going to look like? Maybe we're going to use social media, email, direct mail, but what methods are we actually using to communicate with that public we found out about in our research section? And then once our program concludes, we move to the E of the ROPE method, which is evaluation. And you should always be doing ongoing program monitoring and adjustment, which is, if I have a year-long campaign, I'm not going to wait 365 days to evaluate it, but I should always be paying attention to what's happening with each of my tactics, how they're playing out, how they're being received, and continuing to monitor that progress, especially if I need to make any changes. So if I find out that our social media is just not doing very well, or one of our accounts is not doing very well, I might decide to not invest as much time or resources into that channel and focus more on the ones that are being successful. And then at the conclusion, we look at the success of the program overall. How successful was it in achieving its objectives? And that's one thing I want you to pay attention to when looking at these case studies is how often do they take the evaluation section and look back at the objectives? Because you'll find in the profession and in the field, a lot of these cases don't examine things or don't evaluate things from an objective perspective. And those objectives are really important because you're basically saying this is the outcome I'm committed to achieving. It's like making a contract. It's what you're promising the client or your organization that you're going to do. And then in the evaluation section, if you don't talk about whether or not you reach those objectives, there's something very odd about that. And it should give you a red flag when you read cases that don't revisit those objectives or don't have objectives at all. So what exactly are cases? What are we going to be looking at in this class? Well, they're illustrations of the PR process in action. They're actual PR campaigns that happened in the real world that we can learn from, that we can take a safe perspective on because we're not actually doing them ourselves, but we can look at and analyze and see how does this process that we talk about, how does this rope method actually come to life from a practitioner's point of view. They help demonstrate the PR principles that we talk about a lot and how PR management works in a real life scenario. And you'll see a lot about how independent agencies will come in and work with organizations, and I think that's an important thing to pay attention to as well, is how does the relationship between client and agency work, especially for those of you who see yourselves working in an agency versus working for an actual organization. But they help test theoretical applications in real situations and environments that are very safe for us to observe because we're not doing them ourselves. But I challenge you, don't just think that each one of these cases is perfect and is the best case you've ever read, because I will tell you most of these cases are flawed in some way. And what I really would like to see you do is take a really critical eye to these cases and think, when I become a practitioner, how would I do this differently? How could I improve this case? What are some tools I now have available that they did not have at the time that I could use to really improve this case? And that's the best part about new technology, is that the internet has evolved into a forum for conversations. Here we are taking a class online, and so we know how great this new technology can be. And it helps us have new systems where we conduct relationship building. Before social media, before the internet, it was either you went in person to an organization or you called them over the phone. And now we have the availability and accessibility to basically contact an organization 24/7, which is a really wonderful opportunity, but it also presents some new challenges for a PR practitioner who has to answer all of these, right? But audiences are no longer passive recipients to mass media. They're now creators, they're publishers. Anyone out there can publish a post in about 10 seconds. So they're no longer just reading everything. Now they are a part of the conversation. And again, very exciting. It allows us to have that two-way communication, which is so important in relationship building, but also scary because we are no longer in control of all of the messaging that surrounds our organization. And that's why it's so important for us to be listening to these conversations, to be doing that environmental scanning where we're asking ourselves, what is being said about our organization, and is it accurate? And then always remember, 41% of Americans rarely use these tech assets or are off the network, which means there's still a significant portion of the American population that is not accessible through these channels. So we do still need to use some of those traditional channels that are more synonymous with PR and traditional PR than just using the internet. So consider that as well as you're looking at these cases. And then the last dimension that we need to talk about when we talk about public relations in action and just how it plays out in the real world is this commitment to ethics, right? We as a profession are very committed to ethical decision making because of where our roots are. In our history and sort of in what we're known for, PR was not considered the most ethical practice. When we think back to mudraking and spin doctors, it was not a good look for PR, where hyperbole and exaggeration were used a lot to manipulate the way publics viewed an organization. Well, we don't want to have that reputation anymore, right? We want to be a credible profession who's dedicated to making their public's lives better, to assisting their organization and helping their client. So in order to do that and to be ethical decision makers, here are some things that we are committed to via PRSA. And for those of you who don't know what PRSA is, it's the Public Relations Society of America. We do have a student chapter here at the University of Akron, PRSSA. We will be recruiting this spring if you'd like to join, which I always suggest to my PR majors. But some of the things we're committed to from a PR perspective are responsible advocacy, which says that we are here to advocate for our client and for our publics. That means that I'm always going to stand up for what's right for my publics, for safety, for health, but I'm also going to make sure that I respect the privacy of my organization and that I respect what's best for my organization as well, which can be a difficult balance to maintain as a PR practitioner. Honesty is very important. We know that we don't want to manipulate facts or lie to our publics. That's automatically going to break trust, so honesty is very important. We want to use our expertise appropriately, so make sure that we're using it especially in counseling and consultation with upper management. We want to maintain independence and fairness as practitioners. And then also we want to have loyalty to our organization. And then a couple other activities that we're dedicated to, which is protecting and advancing the flow of accurate information, which sort of goes with honesty. Promoting healthy and fair competition between other people in our industry. Disclosing honest and accurate information. Again, we see this very similar concept again, but again, it's really important. Protect the privacy and confidentiality of our publics and client. Avoid conflicts of interest, and also strengthen trust in the profession. And this goes back to that repairing the image of PR so that we can be credible practitioners working in a well-respected field. If you want more information about ethics and how ethics works with PR, you can always see the PRSA Code of Ethics at www.prsa.org, where it talks about the significance of ethics in PR. And here we have the ethics pledge that each PRSA member takes. So if you take a look at that, you can also see how committed we are to ethical decision making. And then I'm going to finish off by talking about some questionable ethical practices. And I want you to really keep these in mind, not just because they're on a quiz, but also because when you look at these case studies that we'll read here in the coming weeks, I want you to ask yourself, do you see any of these questionable ethical practices appearing? And I will tell you, you will. So keep an eye on these and ask yourselves, how are these utilized? Are they utilized well, or are they unethical in the ways they're used in the case studies we see? So the first one here is lowballing, which is downplaying expectations. We see lowballing happen a lot in the objectives portion, where they create an outcome that's easily attainable, that they know they can easily attain, just to make themselves look better. So say, for example, that someone working in PR for the Cavs says that, well, our objective is to have 100 people attend the Golden State Warriors versus Cavs basketball game. Well, we know for sure they're going to get at least 100 people. That's easy peasy. That's lowballing, right? They're probably going to have thousands of people there. So we don't want to downplay expectations because it really has just a very shisty, seedy feel to it. Be honest, be accurate, and try and get as close to what you think you can deliver as possible. The idea of spin, we hear this a lot when we think about the history of PR, but it is the one-sided use of facts or data, basically the manipulation of information to make yourself look better or make your organization look better than it really is. Again, we'll see this used a lot, so pay attention to fact checking. And then there's some different types of distortion. So the first one is hype, which is short for hyperbole, but it's really just a magnification of what is actually true. It's sort of an exaggeration, right? So to say that you had the biggest attendance ever at your inauguration, whether or not that's based in fact, that's hyperbole unless it's actually true. So you always want to make sure if you're going to talk about something that could be in the hyperbole range, that you're providing facts to back it up. Minimizing, this is the idea that you're downplaying what happened. We see minimizing happen a lot in crisis communication, where they try to make a problem seem like it's not as big of a deal. The slippery slope here is when you're minimizing something, it also has a tendency to make it seem not important. And with crisis communication, when we're talking about the health and safety of people or potentially the death of people, you don't want to downplay that. That's a very real, serious issue. So always be tactful and respectful of that. Overgeneralization, these are sweeping conclusions. So basically drawing a conclusion based on some sort of information that are not necessarily actually connected. So if I say that 2 out of 5 dentists eat Carmelo chocolate bars, so they're dentist approved, that's an overgeneralization. Most dentists are going to tell you don't eat Carmelo bars. Just because 2 out of 5 do doesn't mean it's okay. So refrain from making sweeping conclusions. Again, we always want things to be backed by research, fact, information. Categorization, this is categorizing things as good or bad. We really want to refrain from applying labels to things, and you can see that's the next one here, labeling, labels based on little to no evidence. Really only talk about your product, your organization, and what you know. If you do that, if you're honest and open about your communication and talk about what you know for fact, you're going to stay away from all of these distortion problems. You won't have to worry about it. And then the last one here, and this is the one we see a lot in the cases that we see this spring in our class, is image transfer, which is the transferring the image of a celebrity, a sex symbol, to an event or product where they have someone promoting a specific product that's famous. So if you have Katie Holmes out shopping for this Hallmark toy, that's transferring her celebrity, her fame, to this product, and they're trying to utilize that fame to make their product more important, more trendy, more prominent. And then, of course, questionable ethical practices. We know lies are bad. We've already stressed how important honest communication is. So, of course, lies, the exact opposite, are bad. And then also cover-ups, where we try to take a situation, a problem, and make it unknown. The difficulty with cover-ups, and especially in this day and age with investigative reporting and the internet and, whistleblowers, is typically it's going to get found out. So if you try to hide it, it's only going to make your organization look worse. Please avoid cover-ups. It's always best to just disclose the information right away and manage the crisis. We talk about risk management because cover-ups never work out. So in conclusion, Chapter 1 really focuses on the PR process, the rope method, and also how do we use case studies to understand that PR process and rope method. And we'll use a lot of our case analyses this semester to further understand these industries, to understand each case, and to break them down into that rope method. So to understand and identify where is the research happening in this case? What do the objectives look like? Are these successful objectives? Are they realistic? Are they measurable, timed? Are they lowballing? And then we look at the programming and how do they actually achieve what they set out to do? And then, of course, last, looking at the evaluation, which is, did they do it? Were they able to do what they said to do? So take some time, read Chapter 1, make sure that you participate in the first discussion post this week, and then next week we'll start working towards our first case study. Your first CA worksheet's not due until week 3, so we do have some time, but start trying to wrap your mind around the rope method and how we're going to utilize that, and then of course understanding how these case studies are going to work.